Hello, this is Miriam Lechuga. This is video blog 1 and learning module 2. The first thing that I wanted to mention we heard during the podcast. And there's an author that's being interviewed over his book, Decade of Betrayal. And that's Francisco Valderrama. And he's mentioning how during the 1920s, there was several people that were deported to Mexico. Specifically, he mentions 1 million people. He mentions that 60% of those were U.S. citizens, which means they were born here. Just it so happened that they had family, whether it be their grandparents or parents that were native to Mexico. They were forced to move over there when they weren't assimilated to any of their culture. They didn't have land, they didn't have work, they didn't have anything over there. But it was thought that here in America, they were taking the jobs of real Americans, of people that had been here for centuries. It really blew my mind that that was possible, to take away the citizenship from someone that's from here, because everything that's been thought that whenever you're a citizen, you have a billion rights that are just granted to you right away. So that really surprised me. The second thing that really surprised me is how they mention El Paso border a lot. I happen to live in El Paso, which is border to Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And they mention it so much because they're mentioning all the different tests that the Mexicans were subject to whenever they would pass through this border. Every time they would pass through this border, they were subject to different tests, to different examinations to make sure they didn't have lice or other diseases, because it was thought that Mexicans were beneath Americans, that they carried different diseases. And not only that, they were stamped with permanent ink. They were given a card so that they would take off a day of their work to go get checked, which was taught to them that was only for their benefit. That was for them so that they wouldn't get stopped by different people, so that they knew that they were clean. That just really surprised me. And to answer another question, what role does race play still right now? I think right now it's still a huge thing. Because back then, it wasn't just Mexicans that were subject to this. It was Chinese people too. Because they looked from a different figure. They tend to be smaller, thinner. So they just looked at them as inferior for those and for other reasons. And for example, there was a law that was passed, that was the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act, which gave the 2% quota on each race. And this was based on the 1890s census. And that was specific to target different races. It wasn't for the people coming from England. It wasn't for specific races that they thought were just aligned to them, to the Americans. It was for the people that they thought were beneath them, that wanted to just come to the U.S. to not get assimilated with culture, but to bring a little bit of theirs, to change the American, that they were going to put a stain on what it was to be an American. And I think we see a lot of this right now with our current president. Whenever he was running for president, how he made that comment about the Mexicans, how they were rapists, they were here to do many other things. And I think the only good thing that came out of all of that is that we're coming to see that there was still a lot of racial thoughts in a lot of Americans, but it wasn't really talked about openly. And I think because our president has put everyone in a certain situation where now it's coming out. Now that it's out on the table, now it's finally being talked about. Now we can finally see how a lot of the thoughts that we're having right now, they were going through 100 years ago. 100 years ago, when all of this immigration was starting, it's still happening right now. There's still that thought that Mexicans, people from Central America, are just so beneath Americans. And now we can finally talk about it. We can talk about where it started, why it started, and why it's still happening. Why are we still thinking the way people thought 100 years ago?